So our reading today from Matthew's Gospel in two parts, asking two big questions. Who is Jesus, first and foremost, and who is John the Baptist? That second section where Jesus talks to the people and says, what did you expect when you went out to see John? A blade of grass, somebody dressed in fine clothes, metaphors and references, of course, to Herod in those days. Herod, who had reeds as symbols on his coinage and who did dress up in fine clothes and live in a palace. John, not what the world thinks of as important, Jesus says, and yet people flocked out to see him, to be baptized by him, to be made ready for the coming of the Lord. And John, referenced by Jesus as being the greatest man that's ever lived. And this is Jesus, a Jew, talking to Jews about the greatest man who ever lived, greater than Abraham, greater than David, greater than the prophets. This is incredible stuff. And yet, he says, John, less than anyone who's come into an awareness of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Because, as is the case in the opening chapters of John's Gospel, where we have that lovely creation language of the birth of Jesus being a recreation of the world, just like the Genesis story of the creation of the world and the universe initially, that myth that goes through Christianity of God creating all things. In Jesus, as John makes plain in his Gospel, that's all made new. That's all a new start. And there is nothing Jesus is saying of John the Baptist in this situation that doesn't also underpin that sense that, yeah, those who come to believe in Jesus who's risen, that's a new thing. That's something so amazing. It blows away the past. It doesn't make the past unimportant, but it's just so different. This is totally, utterly new and mind-blowingly big. And what is it? Well, even John the Baptist has to ask from prison. Go, he says to his disciples, ask Jesus, are you in fact the one who I proclaimed as being the Lord who was coming, the Messiah? And Jesus doesn't say, yes, I am, or yes, here are my credentials. He says, look at what you're seeing and what you're hearing. What does that tell you? What do people see and what do they hear when they look at me? Healing, teaching, set free, love. And the calling for each one of us, of course, as we come into an awareness of God's great love for us, is to ask that same question of our own lives. What do people see? What do they hear from us? Not what do we tell them? What do they see? What do they get? What is it that they can perceive in all honesty and truthfulness that runs through us like writing through seaside rock? What is it that seems to power and infuse and encourage and fill us with joy? Our lives need to be, as John the Baptist was, a forerunner, but not to the birth of Jesus and to the coming of the Messiah, and indeed to a post-resurrection Jesus. Our lives need to point to God. In the smallest of encounters, in every encounter, whenever there is an opportunity, whenever people ask in words or in action or in suggestion, what is it that fuels your life? What is it that is important to you? What is it that you would literally die for? It is that knowledge of God, who comes to us before we even knew of him, who comes to us certainly before we've earned it. It is that relationship with God which is our gold. It is our most prized possession. And that's what we would speak of to the world. That's what we would say to others. Here I stand in those famous words, and I can do no other. The calling is always to praise God through a life of words, but more importantly of actions, to show in all we do and say that we are God's and are really, really happy to be so.